education myself. Um, so Beth, I'm recording this conversation. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So, I've been into education myself for the last 7 years. And after COVID, it was a time where I started looking into how we can do a lot from home, right?
Mhm.
And, there was a lot of self-discovery. And when I was guiding my son, and I realized that there is so much that could be done from home, right? And I was really spellbound with the kind of the opportunities we are having through online teaching, and there was so much already there, and I felt that my son needed, I could help him. So with that, I'll start the talk. So I would like to know your journey, and what have you done and where are you now?
Okay. Um, it's been a long journey, but I'll try to tell you the
Yeah,
short
yeah.
version. So even for myself, I was really dissatisfied with schooling by the time I was in 7th grade. So that's like 12 years old here in the States. I just felt like there weren't any challenges in the classroom. There was nothing interesting. And most of the kids weren't focused on learning. Even back in my day, it was just, well, I have to go to school and then there's my life. And I didn't want it to be that way. I wanted learning to be fun and interesting. And I don't mean like video game learning. I mean, like, I wanted to learn real stuff, meaty stuff, and really get into it and explore it and have conversations and discussions. And I loved reading. I was an early reader and I was a voracious reader. And then I would look around for someone to talk to about it. And there was my mom and dad. But I was getting to that age where I wanted peers. I wanted friends who wanted to talk about this stuff, and there was nobody around who was interested in learning, and I was just sick of it, And so I ended up, and there were a lot of problems at my school. It was a typical giant public school with a bunch of teenagers that were just slacking off and teachers who didn't care anymore. And so I found, well, my mother and I found a progressive school for me to go to for my high school years. And that just changed my entire thinking about learning and how learning could be. And they had preschool through high school too. So I saw what was happening with little kids. I actually ended up starting my tutoring career there because I had some free periods.
How old were you that time?
So I started there at 13. And technically I was an 8th grader, but after a while I told them, I want to graduate in 4 years because I'm doing the work that a 9th grader would do. So I was just always I guess ambitious or something. I don't know. I loved it there. I don't know why I wanted to get out, except that I decided I really wanted to go to college and study music because I had never really had a good music program and they couldn't afford to keep a music teacher there all the time. And so we'd have a really good one and then they'd say, sorry, I'm getting married and you just support my family and leave. And so, but it was just enough to get my appetite for that going. And so finally I was just like, okay, I've done everything. I don't want to stay here another year taking 2 classes and tutoring the rest of the time. I really want to go to college and study music. And so I ended up graduating at 17. So I was there from 13 to 17 during high school. And in my last 2 years, I was walking over to the K1, we were grouped, we weren't graded. So it was like a K1-ish class for kids. And some of them were reading, but some of them were still struggling to learn to read. So I was tutoring them. Then we got a second language student. A family came to our school from Venezuela and she didn't speak English. So I was doing conversations with her, showing her picture cards and talking about what was in the picture and just kind of doing a language immersion, but also teaching her some phonics. So I really was getting the itch to be a teacher, but I was so focused on that music thing. I had to get that out of the way. And then as soon as I was done,
You must be 16 to 17 at that time.
Yeah, 16 to 17. Yeah. Well, actually 15 to 16. I turned 17 shortly after my graduation because my birthday's late. I have a late June birthday, so I graduated in mid-June and then turned 17. So I was technically 16 on my graduation day.
Okay.
And so then I studied music, and then right after that, I was like, okay, what now? well, I'll go back to school and get my teaching credential. So, but I already had this new vision in my mind of what teaching should be. And at that time, teaching was kind of going in that direction. It was the whole language movement and, you know, doing real stories and hands-on, but that never really took off because there were so many critics. And then everything changed I was there 5 years, and then I was pregnant with my first son and I left. And during that time, you know, between having him and him being in school, the standards movement started, and, you know, the presidency changed to Republican, and everything went haywire. So by the time I put him in school, everything had changed and his education was awful. Really awful. I won't go into all that, but he also has autism. Well, both of my sons have autism. So it was night and day from what I would have wanted to what they had. And yeah, so then I had that experience. And by the time my first son was in second grade, we were homeschooling, because it wasn't the education per se, because he wasn't even diagnosed yet, but every little thing he did that was not normal. And I'm not talking like, he wasn't doing like thrashing or violence or anything. He had some issues with that when he was a teenager, but at that age, he was just doing things like sitting under the desk to do his work because he wanted privacy, or he had a subject that was difficult and they refused to help him because he was smarter than the other kids. And it was like, yeah, but if you look at how he does in that subject compared to all other subjects, there's a huge gap. So in his brain, he sees this subject and panics because that's not how he normally does on things. So he looks at it and goes, I can't do this. But you're looking at a raw score compared to, you know, his raw score is still way above average. So you're like, hey, he doesn't need help. But you have to understand that he's panicking because he's seeing something that's really hard for him compared to other things that come easily to him. So you still have to address that. That's part of his disability. That's part of what's going on with him. But so he would see that, panic, not want to be in a classroom with 33 kids and one teacher where everybody's supposed to be able to do the same thing. And he'd go to his speech teacher who was teaching him pragmatic speech, and he felt comfortable with her because he saw her one-on-one or two-on-one, and she was always very patient and whatever. And he'd just be like, I want to do my math in this room where it's quiet and I know I'm safe. Nobody's going to tease me. Nobody's going to pressure me. And they were like, oh, we can't handle these behavior problems. It's not a behavior problem. He's saying, I need help. He's saying, I don't feel safe. He just doesn't know how to express that. So he's expressing it with his actions. But, you know, so anyway, things like that were happening. And I just decided to bring him home. And that's when, you know, I never considered homeschooling when I had my children. I had been a classroom teacher and kids go to school and that's what you do. But I had a neighbor who was homeschooling and I was telling her about my problems. And so I went to her and I just said, I have to pull him out. I don't know anywhere to send him. We had looked at some private schools and he would do things like that. And they were like, we're not equipped to handle this behavior. And I'm like, thinking of the behaviors I handled in public school, and I was just expected to handle them and going, you're kidding me. What's the matter with people that they can't handle my sweet little kid who just hides? He's just hiding. That's all he's doing. And, you know, from there, I ended up working for a homeschool charter as a teacher of record, where you visit the families and you take their attendance and you write down what work they've been doing so they can comply with the state. And I worked at a homeschool center where there's classes, and my kids were both attending the classes. So it was almost, well, they actually eventually switched it to where it was a private school. But basically they're taking classes all day and I'm there all day teaching. So it's kind of like being in a private school in the first place. But they officially made it a private school. So you'd have your core teacher in the morning for your core academics. And then in the afternoon, you could either go home and do everything else homeschool, or you could stay and do electives there. So we just did the full package, you know, and just, we were there all day, but it felt very homeschool because it was very, very small. So you just have a handful of kids in your class, and so I was teaching the upper grade group, which was roughly 4 to 6, but some subjects we'd have a 7th grader in who wasn't quite ready for the high school level. And then they'd leave and maybe have a 3rd grader in who was more advanced than the younger group in something. So, but, you know, so it was a very flexible setup. I had my own kids in my classes sometimes coming in and out. So we did that for a year, but in the end, it didn't work financially for them because the people who really wanted the full day package all worked there. So we were just trading kids and not making any money. It was a great setup for us, but the lady who was running it, you know, she did have one kid in the program, but she was trying to run the whole thing and it wasn't feasible for her. So we went back to public for a while. So kind of worked out that year, but you know, things went haywire again. My youngest son, I did homeschool him a couple of times, but he ended up preferring public school. So we just pulled out a couple times when he had a bad year, like they said, oh, move him here, he'll love it. And it was awful. You know, and so I'd just pull him out. We'd finish out the year and he'd be like, can I go back to school next year? And I'm like, let's see what we can get you into, you know. And finally, like 8th through 12th, we got him in a good program. It was 2 different schools. He finished at an 8th grade program that was really great and recognized all his strengths and was a small program. So he just rotated among a few teachers and they all collaborated and they all knew him. So they were just like, oh, Jordan's wonderful, you know. And in the big middle school, he was just lost in the shuffle and everybody was like, he didn't turn in this and he didn't turn in that. And I'm like, he has autism. He loses things.
I know.
You need to tell him, stop now, open your binder and look for it. Otherwise, you're never going to get it back. And he's going to fail all his classes, even though he's brilliant. So he needs a little help, please, before he gets into high school. And he can't get that help. And then he went to a high school where the teachers were reasonable. Like they didn't stop and let him look through his binder, but they had a study hall where he was able to go to whatever teacher where he had a C or whatever and say, why do I have a C? What am I missing? And then he would look through and turn things in and, oh, I didn't know we collected that here, you know? And that's his only thing, like he does it, but he doesn't know where it is. He does, you know, or I would get the list off the internet of everything he was missing and we would take everything out of his binder and find 90% of it was finished long ago and he just didn't realize he was supposed to turn it in. So he did okay, and he was more. I would have liked to homeschool him, but he really didn't want to. He didn't connect with the kids. You know, he said they're hippies. He said homeschool kids are hippies like you, Mom. But he just really likes to be mainstream, like really like try to look. He does the masking thing where he dresses like everybody and he cuts his hair like everybody and just really wants to fit in. And I think a lot of that was because he's younger and he watched his brother struggle and he was just like, okay, I'm not going to be that person. I'm going to be this fitting in person. And, you know, but he does have his differences and he does, you know, stand up for certain things that he believes in and only hang out with certain kinds of kids. So I'm really proud of him for that. So, but my other son, he's different and he can, you know, when he started out different and didn't have a diagnosis, I was just like, be different, be yourself, because I'm like that. And I just kind of celebrated that with him. And I really like that he will wear whatever color he likes or whatever character he likes. And he doesn't care if it's pink or, you know, whatever. And he has grown up to be a really big kid. So nobody's going to mess with him, you know, as an adult if he's wearing a pink, you know, unicorn on his shirt, because he looks like he could kill you. He won't, though. He's like a really sweet kid. He still is, but you know, I don't worry about him out in public because, you know, people see him and they're like, okay, he's wearing a pink shirt, but he also has combat boots on. I'm not gonna mess with him. So it's a really interesting story. But out of all that homeschool community involvement through work and through my kids, I got to know so many people in the homeschooling community. And finally, you know, the kids were getting independent, growing up, and I was like, what am I going to do? Like, all these jobs I've tried are just not sustainable for me. I'm pretty sure I'm on the spectrum too. I get overwhelmed and exhausted very easily. And I had a lot of things in my childhood that I can look back and say, I seem like an autistic child. And so I wanted something part-time, and everything I tried was just not going to work for me. And I thought, I need to manage my own time. I need my own business. And I thought of, I love to teach writing. And one thing that they did not do for my kids in public school was teach them handwriting as well, like how to print. They both have really severe, well, especially my older one, but my younger one too, had severe problems with their handwriting. And because there was no overarching diagnosis, they didn't even consider giving them any services. So they were just like, well, he has bad handwriting. And I would love if schools would give services to kids for what they need and not wait until they have an overarching diagnosis, but that's how it works here. So you're not considered for, my younger one had, his biggest thing was speech issues, that they were like, well, that's developmental, so we'll just wait until he's 8 or 9 before we even consider speech. And so I took him to private speech and paid for it, because a friend who was a speech teacher was like, he can't say his R's and L's. And I'm like, I know, but they say it's developmental. And she's like, yeah, but it's really hard to understand him, and he's school age. And I said, yeah, all his teachers tell me they can't understand him. And me and the teacher put in a request for speech services, and they listen to him and they say, those are developmental sounds. They'll grow in. And I mean, the last time I did that was like 2nd grade. He still could not be understood by his teacher. No, 3rd grade. In 3rd grade, his teacher said, I can't understand him. And we petitioned the school together for him to get speech services. And they said, no, there's still time. 3rd grade is 8 years old.
I know.
Yeah, so we were just like, what? And his birthday's, that child's birthday is in February. So he was turning 9 in February, and they still didn't think he was ready for speech services. And so, they finally gave it to him in 4th grade. I actually got him qualified while he was homeschooling through our homeschool charter, and then took him back to public school because I just needed to, because of stuff that was going on with his brother. And since he already was qualified, they had to honor it and give him speech services. And then he had been diagnosed with autism by then too. So then they gave him the pragmatic speech too. And that was really all he needed. But my first son, like in kindergarten, he was not crossing the midline. He was not able to form his letters, and they were expecting sentences and paragraphs, practically like multiple sentences in kindergarten. And they were like keeping him in at recess because he wasn't done with his work. And I'm like, how is keeping him in at recess can help him learn to write his letters? How about some help with learning to write his letters? And they're like, well, his preschool should have done that. Like, kindergarten isn't even mandatory in California. So it's just crazy. So I took all the coursework to be certified in a program called Handwriting Without Tears that was designed by an OT. And it has printing and cursive. It's just simplified. So any child can use it. They use it in the regular ed classrooms a lot of times. So, but it's especially good for kids who are struggling. So I've had parents take their kids out of public school and homeschool them because they're doing great, but nobody will teach them how to write well. And they just want to stop and get certain things taken care of and maybe send them back someday. And they hire me, and in 2 months, their kids are writing just fine. They just need direct instruction. That's all they need. And so then we're like, okay, let's do cursive. So we do cursive, and the kids are like, I love cursive because I can just do this and write really fast. And now I can write essays and reports. And this is a kid who like wouldn't write even a paragraph before because they couldn't print. And, all of a sudden I'm like, well, your child is really gifted. I think we can do this, really quickly. And yeah, these are like super gifted kids who just nobody taught them how to write, because the schools are expecting the preschool to do it. And some people go to play-based preschool because that's what's developmentally appropriate for their child. And then the school tells them to do wrong things, basically. And some of these families, they love homeschooling so much, they never do go back. They don't imagine themselves staying homeschooling because they think of it as this huge thing. But once they realize their kids are like self-motivated coming up with topics they want to study. This child I'm thinking of, he was one of my first students. He was in second grade, I think, and he was having all these writing problems. Oh my gosh, he was like, I want to study the Battle of whatever, it was all this historical stuff. He got, I want to study child labor in the early 1900s in the US. And he was writing essays about it in cursive, like pages and pages. And he was excited to show me. And then his mom pulled her daughter out after first grade. She was fine. She knew how to write, but she just realized everything her daughter was missing out on, because her son was doing all this stuff and her daughter was super gifted too. She started writing 5-paragraph essays within a couple months with me, because they were already pushing high standards for writing. And since she didn't have penmanship problems, she was going for it. And then I showed her, well, this is what your brother's doing. And she's like, oh, I want to do that too. I think I want to study the gold rush, because I saw what the fourth graders were doing and it looked really interesting. So, they're both, it is wild. And I'm constantly reminded of of everything that's holding kids back. And I have a lot of kids with disabilities, because they learn that I can work with those kids and they come to me. And from what the public school was doing to what they're able to do with freedom is just astonishing, completely astonishing. So that's my story. I didn't keep it that short, but
No, it is, you were such a such a beautiful flow, and it was, that is what I wanted to capture in how you have grown. And because it mostly comes from our personal stories, isn't it? What we have been watching as a parent, and that is, I think it influences a lot when we go around and doing what we want to do and pursue. I think that's how it started with me as well, because when I was watching my son, I felt that the school was keeping him really slow. He was capable of much more. I started realizing that he wanted challenges, but the school, I felt that he was going there, he was loving it, but there was no spark of learning, at him. There was no joy. That was completely missing. I mean, I thought, am I going to do this for the rest of 12 years with him, just dragging him out of the bed at 6 a.m. in the morning and thirsting that toothbrush in his mouth, and then drag him to school. And he remains clueless for the entire day, though he's quite a smart kid, and he comes back very tired to do anything at all. So and especially with the corona time, the COVID time, it really struck me that there was so much that we could do together at home, instead of chasing the school, where I have where I have believed that everything is there. I have to somehow go there and get everything. And when there were so many resources available, I realized that it's easy. We can do it we can do all this at home, and I could focus on what he really likes, because the school, amongst the 30 students, the teacher will never know that my son can even write. He was lost. He would have never known. And I would be just flicking through the report cards year after year, and trying to fix all the scores that that's what becomes your role. If maths was down, I'm trying to help with maths. If English is down, I'm trying to help with English. And that's how my son will be reaching 12th. And that is what my role is going to be throughout. Whereas I know that I am someone who's very interested in what happens in education, what can get better. So then I started actually interfering in what I can do. And I see a lot of change in my son. He can do what he wants. He can read how much he wants. He's not limited by the ring of the bell, where the bell goes and then you shut out. And so another thing that I wanted to ask you, that so that English programs that you make, so it is based on individual. How does it work, the program that you make for students?
Well, I do individualize it based on the student. First of all, I have all different ages and I have kids with disabilities and without disabilities. So it depends. I talk to the parent when they approach me for tutoring and find out what they want. My main things are writing and handwriting, but people are now coming to me for reading and for, and sometimes they want to put in grammar, vocabulary, just all aspects of language arts. And if I'm coming there anyway, I will do math or other things too. But since people know, they hear about me for the language arts, and that's my special subject. So most of the time it's language arts related. So it kind of depends on what the parent wants and what the student needs to work on and things like that. But right now I have 4 or 5, I've lost count now, 6th graders, and they're all girls. And so since I have that, I do, like this year, I decided ahead of time to do kind of a program for the year, just loose. And I looked at the standards for 6th graders. Not all the parents are required to worry about the standards because it depends what type of homeschooling program they're in. But I thought, well, let's just look at what the different genres are that they're supposed to focus on and kind of space them out over the year. And then as far as the particulars, then that depends on the kid and what program they're doing. And, parents can always say, you know what, I don't even want them to work on that genre this year. And that's fine. But usually they don't have time to even think about that. So if I put something out as like, let's do this, let's do an opinion, and then let's do fiction, and then like that, and spread it over the year, that gives them sort of a plan in their mind. And then when we come upon that one, then the student can decide what their opinion topic is or what they want to do a report on or whatever. And one parent has already told me, oh, when we come to that time of the year where they're doing the report, you suggested maybe ancient history if we're doing the 6th grade history, but we're going to be taking a class on this. So can we do our report on that? And I said, absolutely, you can do your report on anything you want. I just think it's important to do a report every year once they're old enough. So we usually start around, well, when they're really little, I have like a little animal report that we do for little ones. And then, so usually around 2nd grade, but some 1st graders are ready for it. And then, well, sometimes 3rd grade too, somewhere in there, depending when they start with me, we do an animal report. And then 4th grade is traditionally, for Californians, we usually do a missions report. And a lot of my students wanted to go another way and talk about what was bad about the missions. And the truth about the missions and how a lot of Native people were tortured and enslaved and stuff like that. And that, their parents were okay with that too. That's what their parents wanted them to do. And so we did that, and that was really good because they were mature enough, and their parents went through the materials and only showed them what they thought they could handle. They didn't give them like all the gory details of that, but they just wanted them to know about missions from that perspective, because traditionally in our textbooks it's been really glorified as the wonderful California missions. Go visit them all, they're so great, and it left out all what really happened. And so 2 of my girls did reports about that. And they also included some nice details about the Native people and how they lived and, their clothing and their customs and all that. So that was really nice. And then last year for 5th grade, they did state reports, which is our typical thing that they would do in public school. And I taught 5th grade, so I have tons of state report resources. And, I let them do drawings and study about the state animal or whatever, and they got to pick any state they wanted. So we had this huge variety of states. Some people went by, my aunt lives there, and some people went by, I've always wanted to go there or whatever. So really, a really big variety among the 5 girls. And so, we just do like some kind of report each year, so they get used to the idea of presenting something that takes months to do. So, yeah, so that's what I'm doing for the older kids. But for little ones, we do like poetry and stories and personal narratives, like a real story that happened to them, things like that. but then, yeah, and then beyond that, it depends. Like some parents want them to study Greek and Latin roots. And so I'm just always on the lookout for fun curriculum. So I search online for things I can buy, like a lot of teacher-made resources where they've done this in their classroom, but it's not like dry. It's something cute where, you know, you make a drawing that helps you remember that port means carry or something like that. So you show a kid carrying a whole bunch of books or something like that. And so, because I always try to make it fun and not overload them. So if we're going to do, you know, Greek and Latin roots, we're going to learn one each time I come. We're not going to memorize 10 for a test. We're going to learn one, and we're going to talk about all kinds of words we can think of that have that in it. And we're going to draw a picture or whatever. So yeah, the kids always seem to really enjoy it. So I guess that means I'm doing a good job.
You're making it quite fun. I mean, it's quite, sounds very children-led, you know, they decide what they want to do and they are not told what to do. And I think where the difference comes, where they decide and you are just a
Yes.
guide, the entire idea of learning, you know, flips, and children never like to be told, I think. And
Right.
then, you know, when they come and tell you that, you know, this is what I want to explore, and they just want you to be there and guide them, I think it becomes really, really interesting. Beth, I think Zoom has given me only 1 hour, so I think we have hardly 7 minutes left.
Okay.
But I feel as if I've just started the conversation with you. So one important question I wanted to ask you is, so are all these classes, are all these virtual classes, or they are in-person classes? How does this work?
Most of my students are in person. I have one little guy that's learning to read on Zoom with me because the family used to live nearby, but they have had to move. But the mom still wanted him to work with me this year. So we're doing it on Zoom, and I was kind of skeptical, you know, because he's little and it's reading. And I was like, I don't know, but you know, he's very attentive and he's very motivated. So, you know, I just give him really precise directions. You know, I'll put the paper on my screen and he has the paper in front of him. So I'll say, do you see that picture on the top of that animal with a long tail? Okay, what's the first letter? R. Okay, can you sound out those letters? And he's like, at, rat. You know, so he's good at following where I am and, you know, sounding out and knowing what he's supposed to be doing. And he's, and I'll say, okay, so now you're going to write that on the lines. And he's like, I already did. So he's adorable. And then I have a girl who, I had her in high school. She has multiple disabilities, but she ended up graduating with honors. I'm so proud of her. She worked really, really hard. And so she's in junior college now, and she has a job. And she has a difficult job at a pet store, doing like taking care of animals and running to the cash register and doing multiple things, which is amazing because her executive functioning is very, you know, is affected by her disabilities. But she wanted my support even while she's in college. And I normally only work in the mornings, but I said, I'll give you one afternoon a month to check in with me for an hour, bring whatever you're struggling with, whatever you want to ask me about, and we'll meet for an hour, a check-in, so you still feel like you have my support. So now she's studying for her written test for driving. So that's what we were going over, you know, all the rules and where she's confused in the book. Like, I don't understand what this even means with all these left turns and everything. And so they have it online. And so we're able to put it up on the screen and talk about it together. And so those are my two Zoom students right now. During COVID, of course, I had everybody on Zoom, or people just took a break. If they felt like their kids couldn't really pay attention on Zoom, we just took a break until they were ready. But now it's, yeah, we're mostly in person around here. The COVID numbers are way down. And so those two are just because of distance now. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think this might be my last question because we're running out of time. But
okay, we can always schedule another.
Exactly, because you know, I just feel like you've just started talking.
Yeah.
And it's already 10 20 p.m. here in India. So
that's okay.
So yeah. So yeah, what I was saying, no, that now that we are having all this conversation, we can connect with people, and many people are talking about homeschooling and unschooling, even in India, which was something we wouldn't have spoken about it, about a virtual school or about an online school. But now parents are, I don't know about, but I feel that many parents have come to face it, irrespective of what their child needs are. Many of us are at least talking about it and have started taking that bold step of, taking the lead, or following a child's lead instead of, chasing the best school in the town, which is like a fox, chasing what is the best school in the town. That was used to be a conversation, but now people are actually slowly, moving towards what my child needs. So, what's your opinion on that? I mean, with the time.
Yeah, well, there are schools that are opening that have more of a philosophy like this, but they're very few and far between, and usually they're private, so there's a cost involved. So I think that's why the homeschooling is catching on so much right now, because at least in my area, the economy situation is really bad. So people are saying, well, I don't know if I can quit my job and homeschool, but then when you look at the price of private school,
I know. It's everywhere. It's the same, actually, to be frank.
Yeah.
The fees are roaring high,
Yeah.
And I mean, I've heard a parent telling me that, I've spent so many lakhs and then my child still cannot write, cannot read. What kind of an international school it is. So, but still the fear is always there, the society fear of not having to send the child outside and what people will think of me, right? So that fear is still, but many parents have started, understanding, like what I said, and they are taking the child's lead.
Mm-hmm.
So things are changing. And
yeah, I think around here, what we do is there's so much homeschooling that people are working together to do little groups, social groups, classes, and things like that. Some classes cost money, but we have charter schools that are for homeschoolers. So if you're a member of the charter school, yes, you have to meet some of the public school requirements. So that's what I was saying. I had that job. Yeah.
Yeah, we have only 1 minute left. Zoom is telling me that we don't have time at all. So
okay.
So we might have to wrap up. I don't want to do.
So let's talk about this on another meeting. Let's go into what all the options are.
Yeah. So we'll maybe this can be like a series, and we'll talk more about the alternative options now. And this can be our introductory part, and we'll see where that second talk leads us to, when we might have a third session. And it can be very crisp. Then we can